The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Wyden.
Thank you,
is
Mr. Chairman.
recognized.
Director Tannen, as you know, your October 7th letter to Chairman Graham generated a fair amount of discussion.
Oh, I know.
I was interested in asking about a part of it that really hadn't. The last graph in the letter says, and I quote, Iraq's increasing support to extremist Palestinians, coupled with growing indications of a relationship with al-Qaeda, suggests that Baghdad's link to terrorists will increase, even absent U.S. military action. Now, I wanted to ask you about this.
I don't have it.
Because al-Qaeda's desire to overthrow secular Arab states and replace them with Islamic governments would threaten Saddam's regime itself. And so my question would be, in your view and based on the information that you have, what does Saddam gain in the long term by helping al-Qaeda? Because the question, for me at least, and I'd like you to kind of walk us through it, is that a stronger al-Qaeda puts them in a better position to overthrow his own regime, and al-Qaeda's got a desire to overthrow secular Arab states and threaten them with Islamic governments, and just, if you would, take me through the analysis there.
I actually have a different view. I actually think these distinctions between Sunnis and Shias and secularists and fundamentalists in the current environment we find ourselves in are bad distinctions to make in terms of looking at behavior for the future. What is al-Qaeda in Iraq? What would they have in common? Us, the Saudis, others. And the point I would make to you is if you look at al-Qaeda, and you can focus on Iraq or Iran or whoever you want to focus on, but in a clandestine relationship where things are obscured and your hand is hidden, there are enormous advantages. And so I think that distinction that you're making is, now people make that distinction, sir. There are some people who believe it's important.
I just wanted to get your sense of it.
I don't personally buy into it. I actually think we should think about al-Qaeda as a front company that will take capability wherever it can get it to further its own operational goals. And where there's a confluence of a target that's common and interesting, everybody benefits. So the letter, in terms of the things we've seen that we've declassified, senior level contacts, trainings in poisons and gases, some WMD relationships, etc. You've seen the letter. You know, when you peel this story back, I don't know where it's going to take you. And as is often the case in these terrorism looks, when you peel the onion back, you find more and more all the time. The only thing I would say is keep your mind open and don't get, we shouldn't just think about this in conventional terms because they don't think about it that way.
President Bush had wondered immediately after the attack whether Saddam Hussein's regime might have had a hand in it. Iraq had been an enemy of the United States for 11 years. It was the only place in the world where the United States was engaged in ongoing combat operations. As a former pilot, the President was struck by the apparent sophistication of the operation and some of the piloting, especially Hani Hanjour's high-speed diving to the Pentagon. He told us he recalled Iraqi support for Palestinian suicide terrorists as well. Speculating about other possible states that could have been involved, the President told us at the Commission he thought about Iran. Richard Clark has written that on the evening of September 12th, President Bush told him and some of his staff to explore possibly Iraqi links to 9/11. See if Saddam Hussein did this, Clark recalls the President telling him. See if he's linked in any way. While he believed the details of Clark's account to be incorrect, President Bush acknowledged that he might well have spoken to Clark at some point asking him about Iraq. Responding to a presidential tasking, Clark's office sent a memo to Condoleezza Rice on September 18th titled Survey of Intelligence Information on any Iraq involvement in the September 11 attacks. Rice's chief staffer on Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, concurred in its conclusion that only some anecdotal evidence linking Iraq to al-Qaeda. The memo found no compelling case that Iraq had either planned or perpetrated the attacks. Passed along a few foreign intelligence reports, including the Czech report, alleging on April of 2001 that there was a Prague meeting between Mohammed Atta and an Iraqi intelligence officer, and a Polish report that personnel at the headquarters of Iraqi intelligence in Baghdad were told that before September 11th to go on the streets to gauge crowd reaction to an unspecified event. Arguing that the case for links between Iraq and al-Qaeda was weak, the memo pointed out that bin Laden resented the secularism of Saddam Hussein's regime. Finally, the memo said there was no confirmed reporting on Saddam cooperating with bin Laden on unconventional weapons. On the afternoon of 9/11, according to contemporaries' notes, Secretary Donald Rumsfeld instructed General Richard Myers to obtain quickly as much information as possible. The notes indicate that he was also told that he was not simply interested in striking empty training sites. He thought the United States response should be considered a wide range of options and possibilities. The secretary said his instinct was to hit Saddam Hussein at the same time, not only Osama bin Laden. Secretary Donald Rumsfeld later explained that at the time, he had been considering either one of them or perhaps someone else as the responsible party. According to Condoleezza Rice, the issue of what, if anything, to do about Iraq was really engaged at Camp David. Briefing papers on Iraq, along with many others, were in briefing materials for the participants. Rice told us at the commission that the administration was concerned that Iraq would take advantage of the 9/11 attacks. She recalled that in the first Camp David session chaired by President Donald Rumsfeld asked what the administration should do about Iraq. Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz made the case for striking Iraq during this round on the war of terrorism. A Defense Department paper for the Camp David briefing book on the strategic concept for the war on terrorism specified 3 priority targets for initial action: al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Iraq. It argued that out of the 3, al-Qaeda and Iraq posed a strategic threat to the United States. Iraq's long-standing involvement in terrorism was cited, along with its interest in weapons of mass destruction. Secretary Colin Powell recalled that Paul Wolfowitz, not Donald Rumsfeld, argued that Iraq was ultimately the source of the terrorist problem and therefore should be attacked. Colin Powell said that Paul Wolfowitz was not able to justify his belief that Iraq was behind 9/11. Powell told us at the commission, quote, Paul was always of the view that Iraq was a problem that had to be dealt with, and he saw this as one way of using this event as a way to deal with the Iraqi problem, end quote. Powell said that President Bush did not give Wolfowitz's argument much weight. Though continuing to worry about Iraq in the following week, Powell said that President Bush saw Afghanistan as the priority. President Bush told Bob Woodward that the decision not to invade Iraq was made at the morning session of September 15th. Iraq was not even on the table during the September 15th afternoon session, which dealt solely with Afghanistan. Secretary Rice said that when President Bush called her on Sunday, on September 16th, he said the focus would be on Afghanistan, although he still wanted plans for Iraq should the country take some action or the administration eventually determine that it had been involved in the 9/11 attacks. At the September 17th National Security Council meeting, there was some further discussion of Phase 2 on the war on terrorism. President Bush ordered the Defense Department to be ready to deal with Iraq if Baghdad acted against U.S. interests, with plans to include possibly occupying Iraqi oil fields. Within the Pentagon, Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz continued to press the case for dealing with Iraq. Writing to Donald Rumsfeld on September 17th in a memo headlined, Preventing More Events, he argued that if there was even a 10% chance that Hussein was behind the 9/11 attacks, maximum priority should be placed on eliminating that threat. Wolfowitz contended that the odds were far more than 1 in 10, citing Saddam's praise for the attack, his long record of involvement in terrorism, and theories that Ramzi Yousef was an Iraqi agent and Iraq was behind the '93 attack on the World Trade Center. The next day, Paul Wolfowitz renewed the argument, writing to Donald Rumsfeld about the interest on Ramzi Yousef's co-conspirator role in the 1995 Manila air plot in crashing an explosives-laden plane into CIA headquarters, and about information from a foreign government regarding Iraqi's involvement in the attempted hijacking of a Gulf Air flight. Given this background, he wondered why so little thought had been devoted to the danger of suicide pilots, seeing a failure of imagination and a mindset that diminished possibilities. On September 19th, Donald Rumsfeld offered several thoughts for his commanders as they worked on their contingency plans. Though he emphasized the worldwide nature of the conflict, the references to specific enemies or regions named only the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Afghanistan. General Hugh Shelton told us at the administration that he reviewed all of the Pentagon's war plans and challenged certain assumptions underlying them, as any prudent organization or leader should do. General Tommy Franks, the commanding general of the Central Command, recalled receiving Donald Rumsfeld's guidance that each regional commander should assess what these plans meant for the area of responsibility. He knew he would soon be striking the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But, he told us at the commission, he now wondered how that action was connected to what might have been done in Somalia, Yemen, or Iraq. On September 20th, President Bush met with British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and the two leaders discussed the global conflict ahead. When Blair asked about Iraq, the president replied that Iraq was not the immediate problem. Some members of his administration, he commented, had expressed a different view, but he was the one responsible for making the decisions. Franks told us at the commission he was pushing independently to do more robust planning on military responses in Iraq during the summer before 9/11, a request President Bush denied, arguing that the time was not right. CENTCOM also began dusting off plans for a full invasion of Iraq during this period, Franks said. The CENTCOM commander told us he renewed his appeal for further military planning to respond to Iraqi moves shortly after 9/11, both because he personally felt that Iraq and Al-Qaeda might be engaged in some sort of collusion, and because he worried that Saddam Hussein might take advantage of the attacks to move against his internal enemies in the northern or southern parts of Iraq, where the United States was flying regular missions to enforce Iraqi no zones. Frank said that the President Bush again turned down the request. Having issued directives to guide his administration's preparations for war on Thursday, September 20th, President Bush addressed the nation before a joint session of Congress. Tonight, he said, we are a country awakened to danger. The president blamed Al-Qaeda for 9/11 and the 1998 embassy bombings, and for the first time, declared that Al-Qaeda was responsible for the bombing of the USS Cole. He reiterated the ultimatum that had already been conveyed privately. The Taliban must act, and act immediately, he said. They will hand over the terrorists, or they will share in their fate. The president added that America's quarrel was not with Islam. The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends. It is not our many Arab friends. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. Other regimes faced hard choices, he pointed out. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. President Bush argued that the new war went beyond bin Laden. Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there, he said. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated. The president had a message for the Pentagon. The hour is coming when America will act, and you will make us proud. He also had a message for those outside the United States. This is civilization's fight, he said. We ask every nation to join us. President Bush approved military plans to attack Afghanistan in meetings with Central Command's General Franks and other advisors on September 21st and October 2nd. Originally titled Infinite Justice, the operation's code word was changed to avoid the sensibilities of Muslims who associate the power of infinite justice with God alone, to the operational name still used for operations in Afghanistan, Enduring Freedom. The plan had 4 phases. In Phase 1, the United States and its allies would move forces into the region and arrange to operate from or over neighboring countries such as Uzbekistan and Pakistan. This occurred in the weeks following 9/11, aided by overwhelming international sympathy for the United States. In Phase 2, airstrikes and special operations attacks would hit key Al-Qaeda and Taliban targets. In an innovative joint effort, CIA and Special Operations Forces would be deployed to work together with each major Afghan faction opposed to the Taliban. The Phase 2 strikes and raids began on October 7th. The basing arrangements contemplated for Phase 1 were substantiated, secured after arduous effort by the end of that month. In Phase 3, The United States would carry out decisive operations, using all elements of national power, including ground troops, to topple the Taliban regime and eliminate al-Qaeda sanctuary in Afghanistan. Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Afghanistan fell to a coalition assault by Afghan and U.S. forces on November 9th. 4 days later, the Taliban had fled from Kabul. In early December, all major cities had fallen to the coalition. On December 22nd, Hamid Karzai, a Pashtun leader from Kandahar, was installed as the chairman of Afghanistan's interim administration. Afghanistan had been liberated from the rule of the Taliban. In Phase 4, civilian and military operations turned to the infinite task of what the armed forces called security and stability operations. Within about 2 months of the start of combat operations, several hundred CIA operatives and Special Forces soldiers, backed by the striking power of U.S. aircraft and a much larger infrastructure of intelligence and support efforts, had combined with Afghan militias and a small number of coalition soldiers to destroy the Taliban regime and disrupt al-Qaeda. They had killed or captured about a quarter of the enemy's known leaders. Mohammed Atef, al-Qaeda's military commander and a principal figure in the 9/11 plot, had been killed by a U.S. airstrike. According to a senior CIA officer who helped devise the overall strategy, the CIA provided intelligence, experience, cash, covert action capabilities, and entree to tribal allies. In turn, the United States military offered combat expertise, firepower, logistics, and communications. With these initial victories won by the middle of 2002, the global conflict against terrorism became a different kind of struggle.